Hello, I'm Dr. Alicia Power.
And I'm Dr. Maria Kang, and welcome to Growing Healthy,
a podcast about pregnancy, pediatrics, and beyond. Hey Maria, how are you?
I'm so well, Alicia. How are you doing today?
Doing great, thanks. So today I think we're talking about starting solids, is that right?
That's the topic for today.
All right, perfect. So we'll get to that right after this little reminder. The Growing Healthy podcast and website is meant for general medical information only. This does not apply to every situation, and should you have questions or if you have received different advice, please contact your healthcare provider.
The views expressed by Growing Healthy and our guests are not representative of any institution with which you are affiliated. Okay, Alicia, we both get to field a lot of questions about babies. Let's do a listener question.
Great. This is a note we got from Jen in Victoria, and it reads, Dr. Kang and Dr. Power, my baby just turned 4 months old, and my mom is telling me to start rice cereal already. This seems really young to me. When should I start trying out solids? And what should I start with? I'm really worried my baby will choke.
That's such a common question.
So the World Health Organization and the Canadian Pediatric Society both suggest starting solids between 4 and 6 months of age. Now, you want to make sure your baby is ready because every baby is ready at a different time. So some of the things that you can watch for are, is your baby able to sit in the chair that they will be fed in with good head control? So some people use high chairs or bumbos that are very well secured. Now make sure you do not leave your child unattended on a table in a bumbo because
put your bumbo on the ground.
They may fall off. The next thing that you want to look for is interest. So are they interested in actually what you're eating? I'm a huge fan of family dinners, and that'll probably come up multiple times in this podcast because I can't get enough of them. But if your child's sitting at the table with you in their high chair, are they kind of trying to grab the food that you're putting into their mouth? Are they staring at you, watching what you're eating? That shows that they're interested in time that they can start feeding solids. And the other thing, they want to have the ability to take the food from the front of their mouth and pull it to the back of their mouth with their tongue. So this is something that you'll just have to try and see. But if they seem like they are just sputtering and can't get any food in, then maybe wait a week or two and try again. Just before we get started, I just wanted to put a little plug in for a website called Caring for Kids. It's actually a website that's put out by the Canadian Pediatric Society, and it has amazing information for patients and for providers about all kinds of things around pregnancy and early childcare and throughout the year. So certainly we'll put a link in the show notes to their section on starting solids, but I think that's a great website. I don't know if you ever use that, Maria.
All the time. It's well vetted and a wide variety of topics. It's a really good one. Alicia, I just want to ask you about this whole position of the baby when you're starting solids. So I get a lot of families who want to hold their babies in their laps and feed them at the same time. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't think that's the safest option for a few reasons, because you can't actually look at your baby and see what they're doing. It's kind of an awkward angle. Also, it's a bit messy, and frankly, I don't like getting too messy. So your child's going to spit and sputter and put stuff everywhere, throw things around. So that is a bit awkward too. But I think the safest thing to do is have them in their own seat, whatever that is, and feeding them through that. So you can actually look and see what they're doing with their mouth. And they can look at you and see what you're doing, because a lot of the learning is by showing them what you're doing. And so eating together, again, family dinners, you're demonstrating to them how to actually move that food through your mouth. So, Maria, what do you advise parents on starting solids? So what do you usually recommend in terms of when to start?
Okay,
well, what to start with, sorry.
No, fair enough. So we usually talk about why we're actually starting at somewhere between the 4 to 6 month range, and it's because breastfed babies usually run out of their iron stores by 6 months of age, and that's why we recommend starting with the iron fortified cereal. And this is, again, it's all about learning how to chew and swallow what's going in, not chew because they don't have teeth in general, but it's how to swallow. And you can play around with how liquid you make the cereal as well. And that's what we usually recommend, is starting with some type of rice cereal. It doesn't have to be rice, but some type of cereal.
An iron fortified one.
And iron fortified, yep. And I like to remind parents that starting solids, again, is just practice. It's not about calorie intake. Most of what they're going to be taking in is still going to be breast milk or formula. It's just the beginning process. And then as you feel confident and your baby feels confident in that iron fortified cereal, then you add in vegetables, meats, and then fruit. And we usually suggest that sweet, tasty fruit as the last, just because they tend to always want that, as we all want sweets generally. And you want to give your baby some time to get used to each different taste, because it can be overwhelming. I don't know if you've ever tasted formula before, Alicia.
It's disgusting. Truly disgusting.
Well, if you can imagine, and it's a bit sweet, isn't it? It's a little sweet.
Well,
it's like chalky, milky sweet.
Sure.
So you can imagine.
But I've never compared it to breast milk, so I've...
Okay, I have, and breast milk is much sweeter, and it's creamier. I will say that if you've been drinking that for the first 4 to 5, 6 months of your life, any kind of taste, even if it's bland peas, mushed up peas, for example, that's going to be a taste explosion on your tongue, on your taste buds there. So give your baby some time to figure out those tastes and textures. Okay, I get a lot of questions about food allergies and family history of food allergies. What do you think parents should do in those particular cases, Alicia?
So I think it depends on the severity of the allergy. So if in your family you have people who are allergic to certain substances and they are severely allergic, so we're talking anaphylaxis, hives, trouble breathing, needing to carry an EpiPen around, then you should certainly talk to your healthcare provider and perhaps an allergist about how best to incorporate these foods, or if you even should start incorporating these foods when you're starting solids. But the vast majority of people do not have that significant of an allergy history. So, if you eat something and you get an upset stomach, that's not really considered a true allergy. So I don't think you should be avoiding those foods. But certainly the recommendations are, if you're starting at less than 6 months of age, you should introduce something new every 3 days. So you can continue on with everything you've previously introduced, but give a new food introduction 2 to 3 days prior to starting something else, just so if they are having a little bit of reaction, you know what they're reacting to. The evidence doesn't show us this after 6 months of age, so after 6 months of age, you can certainly start introducing foods pretty quickly right after one another if that's what you choose to do. Again, I'm a big fan with family dinners, as I've already said, and I'm also a bit lazy when it comes to the kitchen. So I also recommend, if you're cooking a healthy dinner after you've kind of done a few weeks to maybe a month of introducing different foods, then just take that family dinner you're cooking that's nice and healthy, put it into a blender, blend it up, and feed your child that. So they'll get used to eating what you're eating, they'll get used to your family's tastes, and it just makes life a lot easier.
That's a great point. So I love to cook with a lot of garlic and butter. I did mention that different tastes can be somewhat overwhelming for your baby, but if your baby gets used to what your family eats, for example, garlic and butter, then that they don't know any different, and you really don't want to be making several different meals for several different people in your home. I think that's just not very practical.
And we also know that what you've been eating during pregnancy and during breastfeeding, some of those tastes are actually transmitted through your breast milk. And so your child will be used to, if your house is a big garlic and butter house or spicy house or those types of things, they'll already be somewhat primed for those tastes. Now, don't give your child super spicy food right off the bat, obviously. But you know what? You can, over time, slowly introduce them to a little bit more. If that's what your family's eating, I think it's important to get them used to those things. Now, we also know that early exposure to foods decreases allergies in the long run. So there's only a few things that you shouldn't expose your child to before a year of age, and that's unpasteurized things, such as honey and unpasteurized cheese. But other than that, you can certainly expose them to everything and anything that you eat that is healthy. Let's remind ourselves of that. Healthy foods. So there's certainly some studies done that we know. So in the Scandinavian countries, they give vitamin K in a peanut oil base in the first week of life. It's not as effective for the vitamin K shot that we give here, but their rates of peanut allergy are significantly lower there than in our society. So the thought is that the more we expose our children to, and in a safe sense, the earlier we expose them to, the less likely that they're actually going to be allergic to things later on. The other thing that we delay starting is cow's milk products. So we start that around 9 months of age, and we're talking about cheese and yogurt. We're not starting milk that early. That's after a year of age. And then, like I said, healthy foods. So please don't feed your child sugars, refined sugars, fruit juices, those types of things, donuts, cookies, cakes. They're just going to have fun with regular, good old healthy food. It's all super exciting to them at this point, and you want to provide them the skill set to eat healthy food and enjoy healthy food for their life. You don't want them to just want cookies and cakes and deliciousness like that.
Because really, who doesn't want cookies and cakes naturally?
Exactly. And once you introduce the sweets, it's really hard to get them to eat good
exactly.
old healthy food after that.
That's a really important tip, Alicia. I think toddler obesity, we know, is really associated with adult obesity and all of the complications that are related. So, if you and your family don't already have the best dietary habits when your baby's around and starting those solids, what a great time to make a fresh start. Remove those fruit juices, excessive treats, and start as fresh again as you can. I know that can be challenging. And then, just do exactly what is healthiest for your baby and your family.
And I think it's important to remember, if you don't know how to do that, that's okay.
Yeah, good
Eating
point.
Eating healthy is a skill that some people need to learn and get more help with. And there's lots of great websites out there. And certainly if you want some extra help, in BC for sure, you can dial 811 and there's a dietitian. It's our kind of local health resource. So you can dial a dietitian and ask questions, or your primary care provider, healthcare provider, I'm sure would be happy to refer you to a dietitian if you feel like your knowledge base in healthy eating is just not adequate enough to do that for your family. And that would be such a great first step to starting your family on a really healthy journey in life.
There's this great tip that I learned about grocery shopping, and they say that if you go along the outside of the aisles, so not within the aisles, but if you do most of your shopping around the periphery of the grocery store, then you're more likely to get those fresh, healthy groceries, which is a good start. And so the more inside those aisles you go, the more packaged and processed foods that you're actually picking up. Okay, so Alicia, what about water for your infant?
Water is great. What a wonderful thing for a child to drink.
And how lucky for them to have fresh water.
Right? So we highly encourage starting to introduce it to your child, even 6 to 9 months of age. They are, like Maria said, they're getting the vast majority of their calories up to about 9 months of age from breast milk or formula, whatever you're choosing to feed your child. But still, they need to learn that skill of how to use a cup and how to drink water, and that water is really important. So at your meals, introduce it to your children. Using a sippy cup is great, and there's a few great ones out there, and certainly we can put a few links to a couple on our show notes if you're interested. So this will encourage your child to have good, healthy hydration for the future, and choosing appropriate things to drink, i.e., milk/formula/breast milk and water. But it also helps them to learn that kind of gross motor development of drinking from a cup.
Yeah, I love that. Drink water from a cup. I see so many families, you probably do, that just really stick to that bottle and put all sorts of stuff in the bottle. Progress to a cup. If you watch your baby closely, you'll know what they're ready for. I just wanted to put out a word of caution here about free water. I just want you parents
to... free, it doesn't cost much water?
Both. Yeah, good one. I want parents to remember that baby kidneys are still maturing, so too much water, free water, can actually be harmful. So I usually tell parents to limit their baby's daily intake of water to 1 cup throughout the whole day. Sometime between 18 months and 2 years of age, you can probably liberalize that as your baby becomes more active and is eating much more. But you really want to limit how much free water that your baby gets in the first 12 months of life. Okay, I'm going to bring us back to our listener's question because it sounds like she was really worried about choking specifically. Alicia, I know that you've had some choking episodes in your life there, and maybe not personally, but probably exposed to it. And it can be a really scary thing.
It sure can, and I think something to remember is choking happens.
Right.
It's just how significant it is and how we react to it is really the most important things, and how we can kind of do our best to keep our children and our families safe. So certainly the major choking incident that I was involved in, and this was not at work, was a toddler eating in the car. And so I think those are kind of preventative measures, and that's not really what we're getting to today, but certainly it's really important to think about when and how and what your children are doing when they're eating. especially as we're learning that skill, we need to focus on it. So being really distracted while you're eating or moving around or walking around with food in your mouth for those kids who are just learning to walk, it's actually pretty dangerous. And so I think it's really important to kind of remember that as you're moving through the years with your kids and their eating. But certainly infants, they're smart little suckers. They have a choking reflex, which is much more forward in their mouth than adults. And that's a protective mechanism for them while they're learning how to handle food. And so your infant will choke at some point, but it's unlikely, as long as you're using safe foods and safe eating habits, that this will be a bad choking episode. They'll probably sputter and cough and kind of maybe get a little bit red in the face, but they'll still be coughing and breathing, and that's the most important thing. So if your child is doing this, please remain calm, because if you start yelling and screaming, they're going to get scared and they're going to have a big inhalation and suck that food farther back, and that's when it becomes a problem. So the other thing that I think is extremely important is taking an infant CPR course. Now, I usually recommend to my patients to take this, in pregnancy, kind of towards the end of pregnancy, so you still remember it. But when you have time, because when you have a little baby at home, you're really busy. And the other option would be, when they're 3 or 4 months old and grandma can come over and babysit while you and your partner go do this. But I think it's really important to kind of have those basics and refer to you get a little manual. Refer to the manual every once in a while just to remind yourself of what to do if your infant or child would choke. And also the other really important thing, as we kind of said before, is stay close to your child, your infant, when they're eating, especially once in those first couple of years. Important, but can be obviously dangerous skill that they're learning, and you need to really supervise them while they're doing this. And we alluded to before, but don't let them walk around with food. Don't let them eat in the car. Just eat at the table while you're sitting down. You need to be able to react, and if they're in a different room choking, and you're not going to recognize that. So sit down with your kids when they're eating, only eat at the dinner table, and be aware of what's happening at all times.
Yeah, and I love that you said that choking happens, because it does happen, and I think it can be a really, again, scary thing for first-time parents in particular, but keeping calm and making sure that you're watching your baby and for how they're doing in general. And then the access to infant CPR courses, I think, is a great point. We were looking for local resources there, and it looks like the first aid group has partnered with Mothering Touch, and they run infant CPR courses regularly. I know that in our NICU here at Victoria General Hospital, there are regular infant courses there available for families after they're being discharged as well. So now that we know more about choking, it's always good to keep in mind that there's a progression here through different textures, and again, as your baby tolerates them. And it's about experimenting with initially soft chunks and then seeing how your baby does with that texture, and then progressing. You want to start with larger chunks perhaps first, and then going to smaller ones, and then experimenting with the firmness of those chunks. And remember, like, babies, they all do it at their own time. We put out recommendations and guidelines for knowledge, but there's no set schedule here. You really have to go with each individual child, baby, and that's sometimes hard for parents to understand as well, that just enjoy the process and just go with it.
I also like to recommend to parents at this stage, once their children are starting solids, that getting a dog is very helpful, because I don't know how people have toddlers and not a dog. The amount of food that ends up on the floor is incredible.
True. Yeah.
Or buy a tarp that you can kind of clean up every night. I'm not sure how people do it, but
before we had kids, I remember we had some friends over, and they had a toddler who was just starting to feed himself. This was long before having children, and I remember they came with a tarp, and they set out the tarp, they put up the high chair, and I had no idea what was going on. I thought it was brilliant, because afterwards they had come over to our house. Afterwards they just picked up their little tarp, and it was like nothing had ever happened. But wow, a lot happened. There was a ton of food on that tarp. It's a great idea.
But I think it's also important to recognize that this is a great learning experience for your child.
Yes.
And making a mess is part of it. So certainly you're going to be in some situations that you're going to need to be a little bit more cautious about, your child's mess. And so then you might be really careful about spoon feeding them. But when you're at home, let them play with the food. Let them get their hands in it. Let them learn about texture and about how to bring that food to their mouth. And that's part of that progression. I remember, I don't know if you ever got obsessed as I did with my first child. It's always with the first child.
That's true.
About how do I start solids. And then there's this program, infant-led weaning, which is kind of about feeding your child kind of more solid food and allowing them to learn that kind of manual dexterity and those gross motor skills. And I was on this website there was, those mom blogs, crazy mom blogs, about infant-led weaning. And there's somebody asked a question, well, can I do a combination of, purees and infant-led weaning? And there's those people out there like, no, that's not how you have to do it. But you know what? Your kid will learn how to eat. It doesn't matter how. You can do whatever you want. It's your family. It's your child. Don't feel like you need to do something just because somebody else tells you to. They will learn, but you have to allow them to experiment and allow them the opportunity to learn. And so then that's part of that making a mess at meals.
Absolutely. And enjoy the process. Talking about being obsessed with your first baby, I remember thinking there are a few products out there for making baby food. And I was so obsessed with needing all that equipment. And, by the time your second or third comes around, you realize it's really just about whatever you're cooking and then making it more appropriate for your infant at that time of their development. So I think it's really about the process and enjoying it. We have a lot of expectations and there's a lot of products out there. Some are great. They're not all necessary. Some of them do make your life a lot easier, but we don't have to have all that fancy stuff. Back to the basics.
Yeah. And I'm going to put one more plug in for family dinners. In case you haven't recognized it, I'm a bit obsessed, and I do really think it's important. I'm going to just tell you why again. So it's important to show your children how to eat. Important to demonstrate what to eat, that you should be eating a wide variety of food. And part of this is recognizing that if you are as a family are quite rigid in what you will eat, you will create children who are quite rigid in what they eat. So take this opportunity to broaden your own horizons and experiment a little with yourself. But the big reason I think it's important to have family dinners is that family connection. And it's learning how to talk to each other, learning how to have a good conversation with multiple people at once, learning how to connect with each other. And so this is the real reason I think it's important to have a family dinner.
That's a really good point. Family dinners are hard and exceedingly more difficult, especially with busy families, parents, households. But if you can manage that, and I think we all should, I think it's a really great start for your baby and for your children in general.
When I say family dinner, I mean meal. If that's breakfast, great.
Absolutely.
Lunch, fine. Just a meal together as a family. And if you can manage that 3 or 4 times a week, amazing.
That's great. Okay, I think we've answered our listeners' questions about starting solids. Hopefully, if anyone else has questions out there, please send them to us through our YouTube channel, and we'll put up those links to the WHO guidelines as well as the caringforkids.ca website, and I think more information about some food allergies in infants, because that's always a common question and it's really good to go to the source. Okay, well, I think that's our question for today. Stay tuned, folks, and keep on growing healthy.